Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's empowering webinar on public financial solutions, which is organized by Empowering Project together with the Covenant of Mayors. Today's webinar will give you an introduction to public financial solutions and to help you finding ways to finance energy or climate measures. A short insight, and today's speakers are Anja de Kunto and Fredrik Norefjell. Anja comes from the Covenant of Mayors and will give you an insight on European calls and funding, and shortly also give you some examples on green procurement. And Fredrik Norefjell from RISE Research Institutes of Sweden will talk about procurement being innovative yet correct. We will take questions and short discussions after each presentation. You can put your questions in the chat function. And you will, after the webinar, there will be a recording and that will be available as well for you. If you come up with questions after your presentation, after the presentations, you can send us your questions as well, and we will forward it to the presenters of today. Let's start. It's 1 minute past 10. I would like to invite Anja to start her presentation. I will make her a presenter. Welcome, Anja.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me today to this webinar of the Empowering Project. It is a pleasure for the Covenant of Mayors to collaborate with this very useful project that supports cities in having sustainable energy and climate action plan. So I hope everybody can see my screen. I've been asked today to give you an overview of the funding possibilities that are currently available mainly for cities related to sustainable energy and climate action plan. So I should start by saying that it is a bit of a challenge to do so in half an hour. So do not expect to know everything by the end of this presentation, but at least you will have a bit of an overview and become familiar with the main terms and the main funding program. And then I'll show you on the new Covenant of Mayors website, where you can find much more information and where you can look at also a successful project and successful example and how to apply for this funding program. Before we start, I've been asked also to give a very quick overview of the latest development of the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, as maybe not all of you might be familiar with some of the most recent development. So the Covenant of Mayors is really a bottom-up initiative that it's recognizing the key role that local and regional authorities have for implementing the European Union climate and energy objective. So it's now reaching the key astonishing numbers of more than 7,200 signatory cities in total, and 540 of these are implementing now also climate and energy action plan. So this meaning not only related to energy mitigation, but also adaptation. And we also have quite a lot of provinces and regions that are involved, but also partners. And in total, we currently count more than 5,600 action plans with an average reduction of CO2 emission of 27%. Just for you to know, the key initiative, the Covenant of Mayors has now reached, this year was the 10th anniversary of the Covenant of Mayors ceremony, but is something that is started even before, so it's more than a 10 years long initiative. The key recent development, as you might know, in 2014, the initiative was joined with Mayors Adapt. Mayors Adapt, so recognizing the role of local authorities, not only for energy mitigation, but especially for adaptation to climate change. So that was initially a separate initiative, and recently they became a joint initiative. So that's why now you hear not only anymore about Sustainable Energy and Action Plan, SEAP, but you hear about SECAP, Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan. One of the most recent development since a couple of years now, the Covenant of Mayors has reached such a level that is now going global. So as I should mention, I am from the Covenant of Mayors European Secretariat, but they also exist a lot of other secretariat all over the world that are currently being opened or they are already open. As you might see from the slide, the Eastern Europe, South Mediterranean, Sub-Saharan Africa, but also we are in the process of opening in North America, South America, and in Asia. This also means that some of the activities that we do are also becoming increasingly global. So cities are able to exchange and interact with not only cities from Europe, but also cities from all over the world. Also something that big change that happened recently is because the initiative is growing so much is the amount of other stakeholders that are involved in the initiative and the kind of support that we as European Secretariat provide you. This is just an example of the kind of support that and the kind of structure that we use in the Covenant of Mayors, but you can go in detail once you will have the presentation afterwards. What is important that we understand that, especially for maybe some smaller authorities or some new cities that only recently became involved in the Covenant of Mayors, there are still a lot of questions related to how to implement successful sustainable energy and climate action plan. So do not forget that there is a general help desk for all of you, and for some country there is a very specific. There is also a country-specific help desk for Italy, Spain, Germany, and Austria. So all signatories, but also not only signatories, all local authorities are able to contact us and ask questions. Then it's not only about answering questions, but we also want to increase the capacity of cities to implement and develop sustainable energy and action plan. So we do so through webinars, workshop. We have a specific part dedicated to finance and support related to funding and finance. But also you might have heard about our city twinning program, which is a very interesting way to exchange between cities that are currently developed sustainable energy and action plan, or for example, learning from a city that has already done it and how they have done it, what was successful, what didn't work, so that if you are at the very beginning of your path, you can learn from somebody that has already done it and can tell you what has worked and what hasn't worked. So the city twinning program is going to open this summer. There's going to be a second call, and so I really invite you, all of you, to check out for this very interesting possibility, and of course also to be kept up to date all the webinars and workshops that we organize. Also, I wanted to introduce we have a capacity sharing corner. So it's a dedicated space in our website, which is dedicated to those that are already signatory. And here you can find a lot more information, especially related to, again, how to implement sustainable energy and action plan, but also how to adapt successful practice for adaptation, which is a big challenge, and also a lot related to funding and financing. So in particular, related to financing, we have quite a lot of capacity building exchange. So our main goal is to increase understanding of what is currently available and to support, of course, signatories into implementing innovative financial schemes and business models. We also have a coalition of the willing task. This means that currently the topic of financing energy is becoming increasingly important, and there are many different European Union-led initiatives working around this, but not only at the European Union level, also at global level. So we want to make sure that all these initiatives are as much as possible interesting for local authorities, and they answer to the needs of the local authorities. What I wanted to say that it's everything I will say today related to funding is available on our new website. There is a dedicated part related to support Covenant of Mayor signatories, and you will see that is an interactive funding guide that provide answers to For example, especially if you are from outside the European Union, there are dedicated funding available for this country, for these local authorities, or if you are searching different opportunities related more to innovative financing schemes rather to grant, this is the place to go. So it's one of the most is completely new. We launched it just 3 weeks ago, and it's I work in this field since some time, and there is nothing as comprehensive as this guide currently available. So really, it's a good opportunity for you to get to know what's out there. So just for you to know, this is the entire possibilities of opportunities the local authorities can use, divided by grants, financial instrument, but also project development assistance. Also, what is important, we understand that some of this terminology is a bit, maybe for those that are not used to it, it's a bit complicated. So in the guide, every term is explained, and also maybe what is most interesting, that this website is currently being translated in 23 languages. So it's not only in English, but you have it in all possible European Union languages. And I think for Italian, for example, is already available, and the other language will come a little by little in the next weeks. Also, what I wanted to mention today, I've been asked to talk mainly about grants. So I will not touch alternative finance schemes or financial institution instrument. So I will mainly talk about European structural and investment funds possibility and the European funding program, with a little bit touching of project development assistance. So this is but of course all this information, as I said, are available on the website, so you are then able to explore further. What is also important to know is the type of information that are included, which again should help you understand what is the most suitable funding or financial instrument for you. So especially if you are a signatory, so local authorities, but also if you are seeking to develop your sustainable energy and climate action plan, or to implement your sustainable energy and climate action plan. And this can be done through soft measures or through hard measures. By soft measures, we mainly mean, for example, you can exchange with other cities on what worked, what didn't work, what is the most successful policy. While hard implementation, we really mean, okay, let's build a renewable energy, for example, plant. So that's what we mean. Or you can also hiring of expert to support you develop, for example, for innovative finance schemes, cities need support for legal support or procurement support. So that's also an interesting division that you can find. We also provide information on who manage the fund. This is very important when it comes to funds that are managed at national level or funds that are managed by the European Union, because then the way you look for information, on the way you apply for information, it is very different. What is also, of course, extremely important is the type of funding. So we divide between grant. By grant, we mean basically you get your money, you do your action, and you don't need to give money back. By financial instrument, instead, a very simple definition is normally type of loan or guarantee or equity, which means that you get your money, but at a certain point you will have to find a way to give the money back. So that's the main difference that you can find. Or is technical assistance, which means that you can receive support. Sometimes they provide money in order to hire expert. What is also interesting is the co-funding rate. For example, under certain funding program, let's talk, for example, about Horizon 2020, some calls, they fund the project only up to 70%, which means as a local authorities or as an organization involved in this funding program, you will have to find a way to attract 30% of the project cost. Other funding programs have different co-funding size, and that's why it's an interesting information to provide. Also interesting, this is mainly for financial instrument, is the leverage factor. For example, when you have an investment opportunity, let's say you get 100 euro to do your investment, normally it's a bit higher. Sometimes your investment has to promise a leverage factor of at least 25 times, which means the kind of money that you will get back will be 25 times higher than the type of the amount that you received. The project size is also very important. By project size, we mean how much money. There are some funding programs that normally they are relatively small, let's say below 1 million euro. So there is, of course, it's a bit different what you can do with this compared to instead some projects that are for 25 million or for 50 million. So that's also an interesting information. And then you can find some useful examples of good projects that were implemented, but of course some links and who can apply. So these are the kind of information that you can find in the new interactive funding guide. And yeah, so that today I will provide an overview, but on the website everything is explained in as detailed and as clear as possible. So as mentioned in the guide, we do provide five. We divide is an artificial division, but it's just to provide a bit of a overview of the kind of possibilities. So we divide in European structure and investment funds, which I will explain today, European funding programs, which I will also explain today. We also have divided in project development assistance. These are mainly, as I said, to provide support for those cities that are looking to develop projects. Then we've also divided in financial instruments and alternative financing schemes. Once again, today I will not touch alternative financing schemes because this require a knowledge by itself and quite sometimes by itself. And I will also not touch financial institution instrument, but I will mainly talk about grants. So those provided by the European Structural and Investment Funds and those provided by the European Funding Program. So the main division that exists, it's who manage the money. And then once again, it's important because it's different how you apply and where do you look for information. The majority of the money of the European Union is actually, it goes back to the national level. So you have, in the national level, through, it depends, either a national or regional level, is responsible to manage this money through something called operational program. So if you want to apply for this type of money, the main managing authority you have to look into is actually a national level and is mainly in your national language. There is a little amount of money left, let's say 22% left, which is centrally managed by the European Union. So, for example, if you want to look for money instead out of this centralized funding program, you have to normally apply in English, and the kind of information are available normally on the European Union website. So now I will talk about the first part, so everything under the European Structure and Investment Fund. I know that in English it sounds very complicated, but I'm sure that at local level you do recognize what I'm talking about. It's just that it probably has another name. This is divided into 5 different funds. One of the most well-known, I think, for local authorities, the European Regional Development Fund, that is available throughout the European Union and is one of the main one dedicated for regional development and city development. Then you have something called the European Social Fund. This is mainly related to the investment in Europe's human capital. For example, it supports youth employment, it supports workers. But for example, we have heard of projects that have used this type of fund to form local authorities, also to implement sustainable energy and action plan. So even if it's called social fund, do not get deviated by the name, because it can be used also for energy capacity building. Also very important for mainly those countries that are from the center, east or south of Europe is the cohesion fund. So this was the idea that there are many countries that have recently joined the European Union, for example, Bulgaria or Poland or or Romania, or there are countries like Portugal and Greece that have additional challenge, and therefore they have additional funding for their work. Then there are two very specific funds related to agriculture and rural development. This is particularly interesting if you're a local authority which is a bit smaller and a bit decentralized. So this is not interesting for big cities, but mainly for smaller cities. And finally, for all those local authorities that are on the seaside, there is the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. I will not go in detail of all of them. Again, this is just for you to have an overview of all the, let's say, mainly the names of the European Structural and Investment Fund. And what you need to know is that these are applied at national or regional level. So in order for you to apply, you have to go at local level. So for example, this is just an example of the European Regional Development Fund, the kind of priority areas it has, and the kind of project and how to apply. What is important, also something I forgot to mention, the European Structural and Investment Funds, so the 5 funds that I mentioned before, can be used through grant. So as mentioned, you get the money, you do your project, you don't have to give the money back, but you can also use financial instrument. So how you get money for a project, but then also how you make sure this money increase, or you have to find a way to get the money back. So that's also something interesting. Okay, now instead I will talk about, let's say there are few funding programs that are managed at European level. So normally you have to apply in English, and they are very interesting for everything related to energy, but also climate adaptation and mitigation. The first funding program is called Connecting Europe Facility, and it's one of the biggest funding program. It's more than 33 billion for the period for the 7 years of the funding program. It's mainly interesting for big projects related to energy, transport, and digital. Local authorities normally they have to collaborate with the national level because it's really about a big infrastructure project. For example, the pipeline that connects Russia with Germany has received some funding for transporting gas, has received some funding from the Connecting Europe facility. But for example, there are also some smaller projects related to mobility and, for example, to the area around the city and how it gets connected, this part of the mobility, with the rest of the infrastructure or with the rest of the highway infrastructure project. So this is called Connecting Europe Facility. Something completely different instead is the Urban Innovative Action Funding Program. This is a very recent funding program, and it's very interesting because only cities are eligible to apply. And it's interesting also because they are not transnational project, which means you don't have to apply in cooperation with different authorities and different entities from all over Europe, but you normally work at local level with your local partners to develop projects which are innovative. So you have to test new solutions which are not tested, have not been tested before. And you can receive up to 5 million euro to do so. The co-financing rate is 80%, which means you have to find 20% of your project size. The kind of theme are much broader than only energy and environment, but for example, there is climate adaptation, circular economy, energy transition, that are very interesting calls. Also, if you do not apply for this funding program, but you can always follow what these projects are testing because some of these solutions are really, really interesting. So I invite you also to give a look at what the cities that have received funding are doing. Also something very interesting for those of you that collaborate more at the macro regional level. It's called Interreg Interreg B, or Interreg macro regional strategy. These are 16 different funding programs, and the idea is to tackle a common issue through exchange project. For those, I saw many of you, for example, come from Greece. I'm sure you're familiar with something called Interreg Med, which means Interreg Mediterranean area, but also something, for example, called Interreg Adriatic Union. So for all those local authorities that find themselves between the Adriatic Sea and the Ionian Sea, or for example, completely different Interreg Central Europe. So for example, for local authorities that found themselves between Germany, Poland, Austria, Czech Republic, and how do they tackle together common issue. And in this funding program, there is always quite a lot related to green solutions, low carbon solutions. So it's a very interesting funding program. Very similar but slightly different at the same time is the Interreg Europe. So the principle is the same. Instead of being at macro-regional level, it is encompassed the entire European Union countries plus Switzerland and Norway. So the kind of project under Interreg Europe are mainly related to exchange of good practice, so soft measures, not really hard measures, and how you can learn from each other or cooperate with other local authorities on a common challenge. Then something also extremely interesting is the LIFE funding program. So if you're looking into working on mitigation adaptation, this is the funding program for you. It's relatively small. Let's say it's 3.6 billion for 7 years, but the kind of project that are implemented under the LIFE program are also extremely interesting and extremely important for those of you working on mitigation adaptation. Also, the success rate of these calls, so if you apply, the success rate is relatively high. I was speaking with someone from the commission, and they told me that, for example, in the adaptation call, they receive 40 proposals and 30 are then selected, which means that almost all the projects that are submitted are then funded. So that's also a very interesting funding program. What's important for you to know, the next calls of the LIFE funding program will be open in 1 month. And under the Covenant of Mayors, we will have meetings, online webinars with the European Commission for them to explain the details of the calls which are available under the LIFE funding program. Something also interesting for those of you mainly working on maybe research or collaborating with research is the JPI Urban Europe funding program. It's mainly related to cities, and some of the topics that you can find are for example, related to urban economies, to finance, but also environmental resilience. And the kind of project that are under JPI Urban Europe are also extremely interesting, and they are again related to testing new solution, something that has not been done before in collaboration with research organization. Again, something it's a relatively old funding program, but also extremely interesting if you are a city, so only a city, not a region, is the Urbact funding program. It's only public authorities are eligible, so only cities. And the next call, it's called Call for Action Planning Network, will be open at the end of 2018, in the autumn actually of 2018. And the idea here is that a few cities get together and they exchange and learn on how to implement action planning on a specific topic. It doesn't have to be only energy or environment related. Some cities are working, for example, on gender equality, on migration. They're working on finance for smart cities. And then again, many of these projects are so good and so interesting, the results that are coming out, that again, they provide quite a lot of good opportunities if you are lacking ideas on how to implement, for example, your sustainable energy and climate action plan. I'll finish with Horizon 2020. Horizon 2020 is the biggest funding program of the European Union, the biggest one that is centrally managed. It's divided in three. It's mainly support research and innovation. By innovation, we mean So research that is then applied at local level. And that's why it was a huge change compared to the previous years. Before it was mainly for research organization, and now there is so many local authorities and regions and cities that are taking advantage of the funding program to test new solution on their territory. This funding program is huge, is big, but it also provides quite a lot of funding program. For example, is divided in parts. So there is a part related to energy. There is a call related to smart cities and communities. And here the funding program is the kind of project is between 15 and 20 million. So you understand that the kind of implementation that you can do is really big compared to maybe, for example, other funding program. I'm a bit aware of the time, so you will have the opportunity to go through all the calls in the interactive funding guide of the Covenant of Mayors, for example, related to energy, but also related to project development assistance. So this is an interesting call for those of you that want to implement a pipeline of project, so investment project, and don't know exactly how to start, or they need to receive support, legal support, procurement support. This is a very interesting call. But also there are more projects related to environment, for example, related to the use of nature-based solutions, all related to mobility. Sustainable mobility is a big challenge, and we all know that transport is one of the main responsible for bad air quality, for example, in cities, but also related to bio-waste and food and development or rural policy. And so again, this is interesting for maybe smaller cities that are more in the countryside. Finally, so I've been asked to provide a quick overview of few interesting projects related to procurement. I'm not an expert in procurement, so apologies, I will not spend a lot of time on this topic, but for you to know, the European Commission has provided some support for those of you that want to implement a green procurement solution. So one of the most, I think, easy to understand examples is cities are responsible for the local canteen, so the food that is served in their schools or hospitals. You can look only at the cheapest price when you procure this kind of service, but you can also think, okay, I don't only want the cheapest food, but I want sustainable food. I want food that is, for example, seasonal, that doesn't come from the other side of the world, and that maybe use also the people that are involved in this organization are also migrants. So this is a very good example of green criteria and social criteria when you do procurement. So yeah, here you can find just on the European Commission website a few handbook on, and especially more than 100 examples on how you can do green procurement. And you can find there is also a help desk, and there are assistants from the Commission for that. And here in my presentation, I've just added few examples that, for example, the city of Barcelona has an entire set of criteria on how they can do sustainable procurement and an entire strategy. For example, green procurement is now mandatory in all contracts that the city does, both related to vehicles in the city, but also electricity, food, as I mentioned, and everything, any other activities. Also extremely interesting is the example of Stockholm that did joint procurement. So what they did, again, I'm trying to explain in very simple terms. I do not procure only 50 buses because I'm the city of Stockholm and I need new 50 buses, but I get together with other cities, and instead of procuring 50 buses altogether, we'd ask for 300 buses. And then again, the cost goes very much down related to this. So again, an interesting example. I have a few more examples, but being aware of the time, I let you explore this. I let you explore this alone by looking at my presentation. Also important, one of the recent development related to procurement is not only on green procurement, but especially circular procurement. So the idea is that everything that is produced, the waste that is produced, is then reused in another company, another organization. So related to reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover. This is also something extremely interesting, is new, is challenging, but the European Commission is looking at providing support again for cities on how to do that. So I'm aware that I talked about a lot of different things and a lot of different funding program and different procurement examples. So feel free to ask questions or come back to me later if you if you want to know more about everything I talked about.
Thank you very much, Anja, for your very interesting and useful information on financing opportunities and your short introduction to green procurement. Are there any questions directly to Anja? You can put your questions in the questions panel or in the chat function.
Meanwhile, maybe we wait for a couple of questions. I just wanted to show the new Covenant of Mayors website and where you can find information on funding. So you can go under support, funding. And as I promised that everything I discuss is the old information are provided in much more details in this website. For example, if I look at the Horizon 2020 funding program, you can see that there is a dedicated part related to energy. So I click on it and it provides information on all the funding opportunity, all the interesting calls, and as mentioned, who can apply and where do you find information, what kind of co-funding is necessary, and useful links and inspiring examples. So that's, and you can also print this information, and or if you don't know where to start, you can say, for example, I am a signatory of the Covenant of Mayors. I'm looking for support for developing my SECAP, and I am from Austria. So then it already gives you the opportunity of where you can find funding program related to this. So it already takes out and selects what is interesting for you. So that's everything I wanted to show, and I give you then the opportunity to explore further this interesting tool.
Thank you. It looks like a very good tool, something that I have been looking for a long time to get that overview. There's one question. How do you think that small towns could use these funds?
So some of the funds like Urbact or Interreg, I promise you that also small towns are involved in this. I don't know what you mean by small, but I guess 50,000 inhabitants or also below.
I think below.
Even below, but then it's mainly in cooperation with the regional level, or you can get together with other towns and making sure that you have a bigger project. For example, under the urban innovative actions, if you get together and you reach 50,000 inhabitants, so it's not that high, you can get together and develop a project together and then get 5 million euro if you win, of course, the proposal. So, and also everything related to regional development fund, cohesion fund, rural development fund. This is all for smaller local authorities. The only thing you will have to do is get together or contact the managing authority of the fund, so at national level, or you can find information also on the guide. For example, let's go on cohesion fund, and you can get to the managing authority in your country. So according to where you're from, you this is then the website of the European Commission, but you have it in all the different language. So, and then you can get to know who you have to contact to get more information about these funds. So do not worry, it's also for local authorities. And as you might know, the Covenant of Mayors is true with 7,000 signatories, but we are very much familiar that many of these are smaller local authorities. So the kind of support that we provide is also for those smaller local authorities. I hope I have answered. Yeah.
Yes, I think so. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? And once more, thank you, Anja, for this very good presentation. I would like to pass the word on to Fredrik, who will talk about procurement. I will make Fredrik a presenter. And let's go.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, hello. Fredrik Norefjell. I'm working at the Research Institutes of Sweden. I'm working with procurement, mainly in innovation procurement, but I made this voyage from green public and sustainable procurement to innovation procurement. So I think I've pretty well understood the situation of the small municipality or local government trying to use procurement as a tool. So I will present the procurement process as a tool. We use this very simplified model of the procurement process that we've been using in several EU projects and even in a Horizon 2020 current project on waste. And the reason we use it this way is to make it easier to view it in different perspectives. So for me, it's especially important to look at how the procurement process interacts with the eco-innovative companies and the market development, but also with the internal policymakers of the organization. So this is a simple model that we've been using in many different projects. And one of the aspects we look at is the drivers behind the procurement process. And the traditional view is that we procure and then we use and evaluate. Did we get a good solution after 3 years or 5 years? And then we use that evaluation as basis for the new needs identification for the next procurement. And this is of course good, but it's not sufficient when we start to look at the challenges that we have. So for example, in energy efficiency and sustainability, there's a lot of new technologies, a lot of new types of solutions. So we need to look to the innovative firms for new solutions that makes it obsolete to buy things the way we used to do. But we also have the development within the organization, the need to be more resource efficient, the new challenges of the changing situation for the local government. So the internal policymakers have a lot of impact on what we buy and what we need to cover by the procurement. But what's probably the biggest drivers today are the changes in the global changes affecting climate change as one. We look at a lot of different things we need to cover in the evaluation of the impact of the procurement. Environment impact's been around for a long time, but now we need to be more socially responsible, and as mentioned, we need to have the circular economy aspect. And all these new aspects of the procurement is translated into policy, local policy, regional, national, or EU policy that very much affect the need for the procurement. So looking at this context is very important in the procurement process to understand where the drivers are coming from. So then in the organization, there is some kind of strategic thinking or strategic process. This is really just a dummy to show conceptually how it could look, that there is a vision of change and there is a direction of the organization. And then there are things considered and decided to do, to test and change, and then to find out if it was a good solution. And in this context, procurement is the operations, that's the process that's done to fulfill the need and fulfill the strategy. So looking at it like this, it's very much a strategic tool in the organization, but it also needs to interact with the market in order to get the results and the impact needed. So looking at a typical market, this is any good. This, of course, could be services or more complicated, but in the most simple form, this is the performance level of a green car and the sales volume of that type of car, for example. Then very much about the green public procurement or sustainable procurement is about trying to raise the volume of the good stuff, trying to buy more of the good things. But we also, in order to reach our strategic objectives, we also need to buy better things than the current standard. We need to move this market in order to reach our sustainability or climate change objectives. And then by doing that, we develop a new market or extend the current market into a more green or less impact performance of the goods we are buying. And this is a very important part of the strategy to understand what can we impact. And that's why the collaboration between municipalities that was mentioned before is very important to scale the demand, to have a bigger impact, especially for, as mentioned, smaller actors. And then in order to have this impact, there is a demand to, or a need to have that capacity within the organization or among collaborating organizations. So the mentioned GPP, Green Public Policy, is the basic level, I would say, of understanding the impact of procurement, and then having a strategy trying to raise the volume of high-performance green products, and being an early adapter of the green electric buses mentioned, to being one of the first adapters to the new technology or the new solution. And then, of course, if the strategy is aggressive or the situation is needing, then it is a need to be initiating new solutions. And this capacity building means different things on different levels. And in order to be a truly driving or transformative procurement, it needs to be also active on the higher level of developing new solutions. But it's important to in this context, say that this is not only a technical issue. A lot of things and changes that we are doing with procurement is not only about technology. It's not business as usual, but it's also breaking the old patterns of social use of products. So we divide, this is just a very simple exercise, a different way of thinking about the technology development being gradual or radical. And as an example of gradual innovations that stick to the old patterns is just to buy a smaller or lighter or more energy efficient car. In order to use this car differently, we can also do the social innovation of some kind of carpooling or collaborative use. And that doesn't require any new technology. It's just a different way of using the product. And I'd say there's a lot of opportunities in these type of changes without having to pay for new technology or the top of the line products. If you go the other way, trying to get the radical new solution, this is supposed to be a hydrogen car, and that's of course is a more expensive cost of driving that type of solution. But in this context, the most important thing is trying to mix these two perspectives in the new solution to get the collaboratively owned electric car that you fuel by solar power in a microgrid within the community or something like that. But to merge these two perspectives in the procurement. So I will not read this out, but it's important to look at the needs and trying to find the core needs, and not just to look at the old procurement, and trying to find the real challenges, and then look across the own organization and the other organizations with the same need, trying to pool these needs to get a bigger impact with the procurement. But then, of course, there's going to be a lot of different needs in a small, struggling community, and there's always a need to prioritize and decide what's the most important ones. Actually, I think I will skip this one. Or maybe get back to it later. This is from a PPI for waste, which is about waste management in local authorities, but it might as well been energy issues. Trying to look at the different needs to in some ways try to weigh them against each other. So in this case, the green impact or the eco impact is measured for the different needs and put on some type of scale to see that in this case the blue need has it's more important to handle the eco impact. But then looking at efficiency gains, the green need is more important. And this way, looking at the different aspects of the needs of the procuring organization. So in this case, the leverage from buyers groups is very important to reach economy of scale. But if it's a very specific solution for the town or the municipality, then it's more important to get the local solution and maybe not so much the economy of scale. But then, of course, we need to have something that is possible to put in a procurement, because there's a lot of changes that needs to be done that has to be managed by the municipality itself. And this is always an issue of what's possible to outsource and to have procured. And in this case, the waste hierarchy or the circularity is something that has to be considered in all procurements, and the waste directives in the EU, for example. And we see more and more of these circular procurement aspects that we'll have to consider when we do the procurement. So I think I got these in the wrong order, so now I'm going to try to explain the big picture of the procurement. Is of course to react to these policy pressure or the needs of the organization. At the same time, to have the procurement capacity in line with this, but also look at what's available on the market. Some things are globally available, but a lot of things related to municipality operations is locally or regionally marketed. And in order to have a successful impact of the procurement, we need to align these spheres or areas. So even if we are aligned with the ambitions and demands from the European market, if the current market is not available or supplying solutions in this area, we're not going to have a successful procurement. And we better find that out before we start. Otherwise, we just spend a lot of energy and money trying. And the same way, there is a lot of high-tech solutions and a lot of research going on in line with the EU agenda that a lot of municipalities are not able to procure. It could be the cost, but it could also be the level of technology understanding or modernization or whatever. And then, of course, to just buy what the market is providing might not be progressive enough or following the ambitions of the EU strongly enough. So we should really aim for the overlap between these aspects and start thinking about this before focusing on the procurement scope helps and saves a lot of energy. So it was mentioned some resources in procurement from the EU itself, the GPP pages you got mentioned before. The eClay Procurement Forum is another great resource to find procurement information and examples from current procurement and yeah, a lot of the EU projects. Another one is sustainable procurement, and working with these green procurement or sustainable procurement or circular procurement, we soon come to realize there's a lot of principles and tools and methodology that is very much the same, and we learn to develop procurement that is both strategic and in line with the needs of the organization. And here are a lot of really good tools and methodologies and examples to help us to do that. I included some slides that you will get within this presentation on my take on the levels of change that's needed in the procurement process in order to do circular procurement or more innovation procurement. But I don't think I have time to go through them, so you can view them in this when you get the presentation slides. So I think I hold here and open up for questioning.
Thank you, Fredrik, for this very good introduction on how to use procurement as a powerful tool in your municipal work or regional work. Are there any questions to Fredrik on this topic? You can use the questions function or the chat function to ask your questions.
I can just, as Anja did, show you some how the procurement forum is working. That you can, in the same way here, you can in this resource center look at your country and the category of procurement or tools that you're looking for. And I think you mentioned the sustainable food procurement of Turin City that was a partner in the InnoCat project. That probably will show up here if you look for Italy, and you look for good practice, and you look for food and catering. Yeah, they done stuff in Rome as well, but here you find some examples of the Turing case. And there's actually a lot of stuff going on school catering and hospital catering, and there's a lot of good examples to reach good climate impact with minimum cost or effort. So this is a good page to browse.
Thank you very much. There seems to be no questions at the moment, but if you come up with any questions, please don't hesitate to send them to us and we will pass them forward. And then I can only thank you all for your attention and wish you all a good week. And